Hello, everyone, and welcome to our next session here at NUGGET 2021, which will be covering crisis preparation. This session will be led by Mark Pritchard of Clearington, who is a former FA-18 pilot and graduate of the Navy Fighter Weapons School. Unfortunately, Mark wasn't able to join us today live to answer your questions, but we do encourage you to connect with Mark on LinkedIn using the link down below, and Mark would be happy to answer your questions if you have any there. So with that, let's get things started. All systems are go.
Hello, Net Trio. I am Mark Pritchard. I'm currently an instructor at the Naval Postgraduate School and also at the University of Southern California. Now, in my prior life, I was an F-18 pilot, spent 21 years in the Navy flying the aircraft. And what I realized is that our experiences shape our perspective. And where we tend to stand on a crisis really depends on where we sit. Today we're going to talk about crisis preparation, but we're going to tell it through a little bit of a story. So the story starts with a post-maintenance check flight that I was tasked to do. The basic game plan was to fly out of Naval Air Station Lemoore, take a right-hand turn, fly into our operating area out over Owens Valley, passing directly over Mount Whitney, conduct the check flight, make sure the engines work, and fly back. Pretty standard for any time we would execute maintenance on an engine. Now, the key elements on the ground were to shut down and restart the engines using the engine fire light. Now, when you push an engine fire light, it shuts off fuel to that engine through both a direct feed and also a cross feed valve. Now, on the ground, when we performed that check, with the right engine, worked fine. With the left engine, it oddly shut down the right engine as well. So we thought maybe it was an electrical problem. We applied the standard Control-Alt-Delete version, or did you just try restarting it approach. So we started the checklist over, couldn't duplicate the problem, thought we were good to go. But in my mind, my crisis preparation started going, what if that happens airborne? What's my strategy going to be? How am I going to navigate a dual engine flameout airborne? Now, if you don't know, the F-18 without engines has about the same aerodynamic capabilities as this washer. None. It's just going to fall straight out of the sky. It is definitely not a glider going through the mountains in Switzerland. So we're faced with a few key facts that if in fact this does happen, I'm going to have to figure out how to keep up airspeed. Well, imagine my surprise when at 18,000 feet right over the top of Mount Whitney, I have a dual engine flameout.
Once I addressed the immediate action items regarding the emergency itself, resetting the fire lights, maintaining airspeed, trying to get a restart, I started thinking about the impact of my action on others. What would it mean to the squadron? Would I be letting down the team? What would it possibly mean to anybody on Highway 395 if I tried to dead stick it and just landed on the highway? And of course, you think about yourself. What does this mean to me? What is the impact on my career going to be? Now, the long story shortened, eventually I got down to 1,200 feet. I got one engine to restart. The next one quickly came online. I returned back to the Naval Air Station and the flight was done and everybody lived happily ever after. However, that event got me thinking about crisis preparation. It got me to realize that most of the time our crises are going to originate from a known threat, a known vulnerability. It happened on deck. It might happen airborne. We could plan for that. Our stakeholders, they really are known to the organization and they're known to the individuals. But understanding how a crisis might affect those, and not only that, but how those stakeholders may be affected, is really essential to respond effectively. And then finally, it made me more aware of how I can prepare for a crisis as part of our normal operations. Today we're going to look at a very pragmatic approach to crisis preparation. These are things you can do today, tomorrow, put into place to help you prepare for the crisis. We're going to talk about identifying our stakeholders, maintaining those relationships. We'll run through some crisis typologies, meaning can we put these into bins so we understand how we can react to specific types of crises. We want to be able to model the crisis and also our reaction, and then we want to play with that scenario as a group, as an organization, to see how we can improve on our response and hopefully put some mitigation strategies in place to maybe prevent them in the first place. One quick recommendation for those who want a little bit more information as we dive into this idea of crisis preparation is the book High Stakes Leadership in Turbulent Times by Dr. Mike Barger. A lot of the information we're discussing today is encapsulated in that book, and he's a great resource. He and his brother were one of the co-founders of JetBlue. So if you do have an opportunity or you're interested in the subject, realize a lot of this information is coming from this book. Now, as we start looking at our stakeholders, and I ask this question, who are your stakeholders? We typically have primary stakeholders that are, individuals within the organization, the leadership, the employees, our customers, maybe there's investors, suppliers, but there's always these secondary stakeholders that may appear when we want to see them the least. The media, the government, maybe it's a consumer group, it's our competitors. Even on your website, you highlight some of your key stakeholders, their testimonials. But maybe a real important question to ask is, who are your stakeholders? So when you understand your crisis and how it may impact your primary stakeholders, also start thinking about how it may impact your stakeholders. If you understand their needs, their demands, you're in a much better position to respond appropriately to your crisis, to reach out to them, to get an empathetic ear, because they know you're coming from a position of knowledge, a position of understanding. The second aspect we want to look at once we've identified our stakeholders is just how do we maintain that relationship? How do we nurture that relationship? And the relationship with our stakeholders is everything. If we want to prepare for a crisis, let's know our stakeholders, let's know what their needs are, let's understand how our work impacts them, and let's understand how our work impacts their stakeholders. And if we can find the time on a daily basis to reach out to one, reach out to two stakeholders, just to check in, see how things are going. Get out of the mindset that the only thing we need to do is stay in touch via email, stay in touch via Slack, stay in touch via Zoom. Spending the time to actually make those connections and nurture those relationships before a crisis is absolutely the key. The third element of our crisis preparation involves understanding what types of crises our organization may be affected by. What are the typologies we might see? Now, a good way to approach it is to kind of set things up into bins. And in this model by Combs back in 2004, he looked at there are times we're the victim, there's times we have accidental crises, and there's times we have intentional crises. Take a look at what types of events you think might be likely to happen. It may be something with a natural disaster. It could be an earthquake, obviously in California, that could wreak havoc with what we're doing, where we're doing, how we're doing. Product tampering, think of that also as hacking, and our cybersecurity threats and what may be coming down the road in the future in terms of these cyber hostage scenarios. We also have accidental threats where we may have something maybe in a leadership role where we have some moral and ethical challenges that come into the workplace. We may have technical accidents where we put out a product that just doesn't work as advertised. We may get stuck in a position of having to recall those products. Finally, we may have some of these intentional crises. It's a human error. It's a human error that requires some type of fix, maybe a recall, or maybe it's just some significant organizational misdeed, whether it's financial, whether it's something to do with our product, with our marketing, with how we conduct business. Either way, we need to understand and try to identify what type of typologies are most likely within our organization so we can start to lay out a game plan for how we might address those. One effective tool for understanding how a crisis might impact us as an organization is just to create a simple model and a simple two-dimensional model. On the model, we can have a variety of axes that will help us kind of pick out what we think is most likely to affect us. I can look at cause. Is it man-made? Is it natural? I can look at the source. Is it internal or external? I could look at probability. Is it likely? Is it unlikely? Through predictability, cost, and even attribution. Is it not our fault, or is this our fault? In understanding the model now, we can also come up with a game plan, an approach to address the issue. And the one displayed here, we can take a look at something that may be internal to the organization. We caused it, it's our fault. What's our game plan? What's our general approach? Let's confess. Let's take responsibility. Let's resolve the problem. Let's compensate, not just directly financially, but let's compensate the stakeholders, make sure we've made things right. Conversely, it may be something that's not our fault. It's external to us, but we're still in that realm where our stakeholders, our name is attached to it. You know, we can set up a mindset to let's avoid the blame. Let's avoid blaming others. Let's avoid trying to point fingers, but let's focus on the resolution for our stakeholders. And this type of modeling helps us get our mind around the types, the possibility, the likely scenarios we might face as a crisis approaches, as a crisis presents itself. Finally, we can start playing some games. And on the IT side of the house, you've had hackathons, you've worked through issues like that. In my former life, it was the wargaming. It was the let's run through this scenario. And I think when it comes to crisis preparation, this is where taking that time maybe once a quarter, hey, let's run through a new scenario, or if we're running out a new product, we're running out something that may be a little bit more challenging, controversial, whatever it may be. If we go through the steps of let's identify our stakeholders and their stakeholders, let's identify a few crises that might be likely to happen. Let's create a red team. Let's create a blue team. The red team is there to be that kind of thorn in the side, to make things look worse than they might be, to poke holes in our strategies, to cause problems after our initial solutions come out. While the blue team gets together and runs through, how would we do this from an organizational standpoint? Play those crises out. Run through a few scenarios. Get the lessons learned. Try to create a standard operating procedure. Try to create a document that you have at the ready for when a crisis does hit, so that we can play the game, learn the lessons, and now apply those lessons as we go forward, and hopefully refine how we do things, refine our preparation, and get ourselves prepared for when the crisis happens, as opposed to hoping that it just won't happen. At the end of the day, and really when it comes down to any crisis, whether it's personal, whether it's professional, whether it's organizational, the relationships are everything. And I cannot stress it enough that the key to crisis preparation is understanding those relationships, understanding what you provide, what you are delivering to your stakeholders, and what they expect from you, and how any of those disruptions may impact them. If you can build and nurture those relationships before the crisis, you are in such a better position to respond effectively. Ultimately, it comes down to this. We need to prepare for the crisis before the crisis. Let's understand our stakeholders. Let's manage those relationships. Let's understand the types of crises we might see. Let's model those crises. Let's develop game plans. Let's play out scenarios. Let's set ourselves up for success. For when the crisis comes, we want to be ready. We want to be prepared. And those are all things within our control. Hopefully your version of the dual engine flameout over Mount Whitney comes out equally successful. But hopefully you're much more prepared and much more organized as a team to react to those types of events.